It was just about exactly 35 years ago, during Lent of 1987, that I took part in a pilgrimage for peace in Central America and South Africa across the state of Massachusetts, beginning in Pittsfield in the west and ending on Boston Common in the east. And it was kind of where I rediscovered the gospel. But when I read this particular passage from the Gospel of John today, I'm reminded of about 4 days into our journey, the single longest walk we made of any of the days of our pilgrimage. We came down out of the hill towns of western Massachusetts, where winter was still hanging on, into the Connecticut River Valley. And it was a warm day, and we walked through Northampton and down Route 9 all the way to Amherst. And that evening, we were received for supper in the Episcopal church. And I'm not going to show any lack of appreciation for the good people of western Massachusetts, but the food we'd been served the previous nights, well, a lot of it kind of felt like it came out of maybe the Betty Crocker cookbook, various things combined from cans. So it was pretty nice to go into the Episcopal church and have a fresh salad and some really good bread and some pasta marinara and glasses of red wine on the table. And after supper, we went over to the Presbyterian church where we were going to spend the night. And it was there that a young French woman named Brigitte, who was living at the same New Age commune just outside of Amherst, where I was living at the time, had organized a bunch of her massage therapist friends, and we tired and weary pilgrims were treated to perhaps the most pleasurable, at least in my case, foot rub I've experienced in my life. This story today of Mary of Bethany anointing the feet of Jesus with costly perfume and wiping them with her hair is a reminder to us of something precious that is lost when we think that the world's justice, the deliverance of the poor, is simply a matter of redistribution of wealth, that it can be achieved purely by making the material equation in the world more equal, without a vision, without a deep grasp with the senses, a deep and abiding hope in the body of the delights of paradise. That paradise on earth that is the love of God. The love that works through each one of us when we embrace one another with love. A love grounded in our common creatureliness. The odor of this love, the fragrance of the costly perfume with which Mary anoints the precious body of her Lord. This body that is going to its death out of love for us in our bodies. This fragrance of paradise, says the gospel, fills the whole house, fills the whole world, we might say. Because it is this fragrance of divine love that Jesus has come and still comes to bring to us. A love that we know in each other, in the affection that we give one another, in the respect that we show one another's bodies in life and in death. On my way across the state of Massachusetts in 1987, like the rest of the folks on the pilgrimage, I carried a cross. A little wooden cross, maybe about this tall. And each one was painted, inscribed, painted white and then inscribed in black lettering with the name and the dates of birth and death of a victim of the war against the people of Nicaragua. And I carried various crosses, but the one that I seemed to keep finding when we went and picked them up in the morning for the day's journey and carried most of the way was that belonging to a young man named Daniel, my namesake, a 13-year-old boy, Daniel Lopez Castillo. I don't know the exact circumstances of Daniel's demise, but the approach that was taken by the mercenary counter-revolutionary army in Nicaragua in the 1980s, the strategy was basically one of, first of all, attacking the infrastructure of development in the country, sabotaging power stations, mining harbors, targeting for assassination all those who were involved in the project of trying to overcome decades of maldevelopment and underdevelopment in what had been a family sinecure, a corrupt dictatorship put in place in the 1930s by a United States military occupation and passed down from father to son. So, for example, a young man named Ben Linder from Portland, Oregon, who just graduated from university with an engineering degree, was working in small towns up in the hilly country on the Honduran border, building small micro hydro power stations so that those villages could have electricity for the first time in their history. until he was assassinated by the contra-mercenaries. And the third aspect of the strategy, besides destroying the infrastructure and targeting development workers, was just a kind of generalized mass terror of the population, to carry out ambushes and massacres, to bury mines in the dirt roads connecting one village to another, so that people like 13-year-old Daniel Lopez Castillo never knew if today was the day that he might lose a leg or an arm or his life. Bethany, the little village where today's story takes place, is just outside Jerusalem, about 2 miles. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a radius of 2 miles around the temple in Jerusalem where nothing unclean was permitted to stay. And so it was in Bethany, just outside that perimeter, where there were hospices for sick pilgrims, for lepers, for those who were, by one reason or another, not permitted to spend the night any closer to the temple than that. Interesting, isn't it, that that is where Jesus chose to spend the night during his final week in Jerusalem. It was there that he clearly must have frequented, because Mary and Martha and Lazarus were his dear friends. And while the etymology of Bethany is disputed among scholars, there's a fairly strong consensus that it comes from a Hebrew term meaning house of the afflicted, or house of the poor. No wonder then that it is here in the house of the poor that a dispute arises between Jesus and Mary on the one hand, and Judas on the other, over the proper approach to the poor. Do we give them money from the safe distance of privilege? Or do we love them? Do we pour out for them the precious ointment of compassion? The kind of compassion that is willing to go to Jerusalem and die on a cross? Do we pour out there in the house of the poor the fragrance of paradise, the vision of our common humanity that embraces with erotic joy the pleasure and the goodness and the wonder that is life on this earth, a feast to which all are invited to share? Do we pour out there in the house of the poor the fragrance of paradise, so that the entire house is filled with its odor?